I remember the exact moment my heart shattered into a million pieces, when my son looked at the car I bought him for his 18th birthday and sneered, "What a joke, you could have at least gotten me a decent one." Those words echoed off the cold walls of my tiny Brooklyn apartment, and for the first time, I felt completely invisible to my own family. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. The morning of March 15th started like any other. I woke up at 4:30 in the morning, the same time I'd been waking up for the past 12 years, ever since my husband left me with nothing but a mountain of debt and 2 children who still needed everything from me. The radiator in my small Brooklyn apartment made that familiar clanking sound, a harsh symphony that had become the soundtrack to my lonely mornings. I shuffled to the kitchen in my worn slippers, the ones with holes I kept meaning to replace but never could afford to. I made my coffee in the same chipped mug I'd used for years. The bitter taste reminded me of all the things I'd given up along the way, the good coffee, the comfortable mornings, the luxury of sleeping past sunrise. But that day was different. That day, I had something special planned. After months of working double shifts at 3 different office buildings in Manhattan, cleaning bathrooms and emptying trash cans until my hands were raw and my back screamed in pain, I had finally saved enough money to buy my son Daniel his first car. The envelope with the car keys sat on my small kitchen table, next to a birthday card I'd picked out carefully at the drugstore on Atlantic Avenue. I'd spent 20 minutes reading different cards, looking for the perfect words to tell him how proud I was, how much I loved him, how hard I'd worked to make this moment possible. The card had a picture of a sunrise and said, "New beginnings await you." I thought it was perfect. I remember touching the keys through the envelope, feeling their weight, their promise. A 2015 Honda Civic with 89,000 miles on it. Not new, not fancy, but reliable. Safe. Everything I wanted for my son as he prepared to start his adult life. The dealer on Coney Island Avenue had been kind to me, understanding when I explained I was a single mother working multiple jobs. He'd even thrown in new floor mats and promised the car would run for years with proper maintenance. I'd found that car after weeks of searching, walking from lot to lot with my neighbor Mrs. Alvarez, a sweet woman from Queens who'd become my closest friend since her own children lived far away. She'd hold my arm as we inspected engines I didn't understand, kicked tires I couldn't properly evaluate, and sat in driver's seats that might soon belong to my son. Mrs. Alvarez had this way of making even the most stressful situations feel manageable. She'd bring thermoses of café con leche and homemade cookies wrapped in foil, turning car shopping into something that almost felt like an adventure. But that morning, sitting alone in my kitchen, I felt the familiar knot in my stomach that came whenever I thought about money. After buying the car, I had exactly $237 left in my checking account. My rent was due in 2 weeks, and I still owed money on my credit cards from Christmas gifts I'd put myself in debt to buy. The heating bill sat unopened on my counter, because I knew it would be more than I could handle, and I'd have to choose between heat and groceries again. I looked around my apartment, really looked at it. The walls needed painting, but I couldn't afford the paint. The couch had a tear in the cushion that I'd covered with a throw blanket from the dollar store. The kitchen table wobbled because one of the legs was shorter than the others, and I'd been meaning to fix it for 3 years. But this was home. This was what I'd built from nothing after Robert left, taking his anger and his silence but leaving behind all the bills and all the responsibility. Do you know what it feels like to measure your love in dollars and cents? To count every sacrifice and wonder if it will ever be enough? The photographs on my windowsill told the story of better times. Daniel at age 5, missing his front teeth, holding up a drawing he'd made of our family. Me with both my children at Prospect Park, everyone smiling during a picnic that cost me $50 I didn't have but spent anyway because they deserved happiness. Robert in his army uniform, before the drinking got bad, before the yelling started, before he decided that being a father was too much work. I picked up that last photo and studied Robert's face. Even then, I could see the distance in his eyes, the way he looked past the camera instead of into it. I should have known he wasn't really there, even when he was standing right next to us. But I was young then, still believing that love could fix anything, that patience and dedication would eventually be rewarded. My daughter Sarah had moved to New Jersey 2 years earlier, married to a nice man who wore pressed shirts and brought flowers on special occasions. They lived in a house with a lawn and a 2-car garage, and when I visited, I felt proud of her and small all at the same time. Sarah called me every Sunday, always polite, always asking if I needed anything, but never staying on the phone long enough for me to tell her about my week, my loneliness, my fears about growing old without enough money saved. But Daniel was different. Daniel was still here, still mine in a way that felt both comforting and terrifying. At 18, he was tall like his father but gentler, or so I thought. He'd started working part-time at a grocery store in Park Slope, talking about saving money for college, though I knew most of his paychecks went to hanging out with friends and buying things I couldn't afford to give him. I'd raised him to be independent, to be strong, to never settle for less than he deserved. Maybe I'd raised him too well, because lately, nothing I did seemed to be enough. The dinners I cooked were too simple. The birthday parties I threw were embarrassing. The clothes I bought him from discount stores were not what everyone else wore. That morning, I showered quickly to save hot water, dressed in my best cleaning uniform, navy blue pants and a polo shirt with Metropolitan Cleaning Services embroidered on the chest, and took the subway into Manhattan for what I thought would be one of my last normal workdays before everything changed. I spent 8 hours on my hands and knees scrubbing floors, emptying wastebaskets, and listening to the sounds of people living lives I could only imagine. The lawyers and accountants who worked in those offices left behind evidence of their prosperity: expensive coffee cups, restaurant receipts, family photos in silver frames. I'd dust around their pictures of ski vacations and graduation parties, wondering what it felt like to have money left over after paying for necessities, to worry about which wine to serve at dinner instead of whether there would be dinner at all. But that day, none of it bothered me. I was too excited about seeing Daniel's face when I handed him those keys. I imagined his surprise, his gratitude, maybe even a hug that lasted longer than the quick, awkward embraces we'd been sharing lately. I imagined him calling his friends, bragging about his mom who'd worked so hard to make his dreams come true. I imagined him understanding, finally, how much I loved him. The train ride back to Brooklyn seemed to take forever. I sat in my usual spot, near the back where the seats were always available, and watched the city pass by through dirty windows. The late March afternoon was cold but clear, and I could see the skyline of Manhattan fading behind me as we crossed into Brooklyn. Home. My neighborhood of small apartments and corner stores and people like me, working hard and hoping hard and sometimes getting knocked down but always getting back up. I stopped at the florist on 7th Avenue and spent $15 I shouldn't have spent on a small bouquet of yellow tulips. Yellow was Daniel's favorite color when he was little, though I wasn't sure if it still was. So many things about him had changed in the past few years, but I remembered how he used to point at yellow cars and yellow flowers and yellow balloons, clapping his hands with pure joy at the brightness of it all. When I got home, Daniel was in his room with the door closed, music playing loud enough that I could feel the bass through the thin walls. I arranged the tulips in a mason jar, set the card and the envelope with the keys on the kitchen table, and took a deep breath. This was it. This was the moment I'd been working toward for months. "Daniel," I called through his door. "Could you come out here for a minute? I have something for you." I heard the music turn down, then footsteps. He appeared in the kitchen doorway wearing jeans and a t-shirt I'd bought him for Christmas, though he'd never acknowledged the gift. He was handsome, my son, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and brown eyes that used to light up when he saw me but lately seemed to look right through me. "What's up?" he said, not moving from the doorway. "It's your birthday," I said, feeling suddenly nervous. "Well, it will be tomorrow, but I wanted to give you your present early." He stepped closer to the table, saw the flowers, the card, the envelope. I watched his face, looking for excitement, curiosity, anything that would tell me this moment was as important to him as it was to me. "What is it?" he asked, picking up the envelope. "Open it and see." Can you imagine the hope I felt in that moment? The pure, desperate hope of a mother who'd given everything she had? He opened the envelope and the keys fell into his palm. Car keys with a plastic keychain that said Honda. He stared at them for what felt like forever, his expression unreadable. "You bought me a car," he said finally. "A Honda Civic," I said, trying to keep the pride out of my voice, trying to sound casual. 2015, it's parked downstairs. It's in good condition, and the dealer said it should run for years if you take care of it." He walked to the window and looked down at the street. I joined him, pointing to the silver sedan parked between Mrs. Rodriguez's old Buick and the fire hydrant. "That one," he said. "That's it. It's all yours, sweetheart. I know it's not brand new, but it's reliable, and now you can drive to work, maybe take some weekend trips with your friends." He was quiet for so long that I started to worry. Maybe he was overwhelmed. Maybe he was trying not to cry. Maybe he was realizing how much this cost me, how much I'd sacrificed to make it happen. Then he turned to me with an expression I'd never seen before. Cold. Disappointed. Almost angry. "What a joke," he said, his voice flat and cruel. "You could have at least gotten me a decent one." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually stepped back, bumping into the kitchen counter, my hand flying to my chest as if I could protect my heart from what I'd just heard. "What?" I whispered. "I mean, come on, Mom. Look at that thing. It's old, it's ugly, and everyone's going to know you bought it from some sketchy used car lot. My friends are going to laugh at me." I stared at him, this young man I'd raised, this person I'd loved more than my own life, and I felt something break inside me. Not just disappointment. Not just hurt. Something deeper, something that had been holding me together for years. Daniel, I said, my voice shaking, I worked 3 jobs to buy you that car. I saved for 8 months. I went without groceries, without heat, without everything so you could have transportation when you turned 18. He shrugged. Actually shrugged, as if my sacrifice meant nothing. Well, maybe you should have saved longer and gotten something better. Or maybe you should have asked me what I wanted instead of just assuming. What you wanted? I repeated. Daniel, that car cost $12,000. That's more money than I make in, exactly, he interrupted. So why waste it on something like that? You could have gotten me something decent for 15 or 16,000. Or just given me the money and let me find something myself. I felt the room spinning around me. The tulips on the table, the birthday card I'd chosen so carefully, the keys lying abandoned on the counter. Everything felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. I don't have $15,000, I said quietly. I don't have $16,000. I worked myself to exhaustion to save $12,000, and I gave it all to you because I love you. He rolled his eyes. My son rolled his eyes at my love. Whatever, he said. I guess it's better than nothing. But don't expect me to be super grateful or anything. It's embarrassing. He picked up the keys and walked toward his room, leaving me standing alone in my kitchen with yellow tulips and a broken heart. I don't know how long I stood there. Minutes, maybe hours. The sun was setting outside my window, casting long shadows across my small apartment, and I felt smaller than I'd ever felt in my life. Invisible. Worthless. Like everything I'd done, everything I'd sacrificed, had been for nothing. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bed listening to Daniel come and go, the sound of the car starting and stopping, him testing his new freedom while I tested the boundaries of my own despair. I thought about all the nights I'd worked late, all the weekends I'd spent cleaning offices instead of relaxing, all the times I'd said no to things I wanted because Daniel needed something more. I thought about the envelope of cash I'd handed to the car dealer, money that represented months of aching backs and sore feet and missed meals. I thought about how proud I'd felt signing the paperwork, imagining Daniel's joy, his gratitude, his understanding of how much his mother loved him. Instead, I'd gotten cruelty. Ideguten indifferenza. I'd gotten a lesson in how little my love was worth to the person I'd loved the most. Have you ever given everything you had to someone, only to be told it wasn't enough? The next morning was Daniel's actual birthday. I made his favorite breakfast, pancakes with blueberries, though my heart wasn't in it. He came to the kitchen around 10, dressed to go out, keys jingling in his hand. Thanks for breakfast, he said, grabbing 2 pancakes and wrapping them in a paper towel. I'm going to show Jake and Miguel the car. We might drive out to Long Island or something. Be careful, I said automatically, though part of me wondered why I bothered. It's fine, Mom. The car runs okay, I guess. Jake's dad helped him buy a BMW last year, so this is definitely a step down, but whatever. A step down. My sacrifice was a step down. He left without looking back, and I spent his birthday alone in my apartment, staring at the birthday card I'd never given him and wondering where I'd gone wrong as a mother. Over the next few weeks, the pattern became clear. Daniel used the car constantly, for work, for social events, for dates I wasn't supposed to know about, but he never mentioned it without some complaint. It used too much gas. The radio was outdated. The seats weren't comfortable. The air conditioning wasn't cold enough. He started asking me for money again. Mom, can you give me $50 for gas? This car drinks it up. Or, Mom, the car needs an oil change, and I don't have the money right now. Or, Mom, I scraped the bumper in a parking lot, and it's going to cost $300 to fix. Every request felt like another wound. I'd already given him a car worth $12,000, and somehow I was still responsible for maintaining it, fueling it, repairing it. When had I become nothing more than a source of money to my own child? The truth was, this pattern wasn't new. It had been building for years, so gradually that I hadn't noticed until that moment with the car keys forced me to see it clearly. Daniel had learned to take my generosity for granted, to expect my sacrifices without acknowledging them, to treat my love like a resource that would never run out no matter how much he demanded. I started paying attention to our conversations differently. Every phone call seemed to begin with Mom, I need. Or Mom, can you? When was the last time he'd called just to check on me? When was the last time he'd asked about my day, my health, my feelings? I couldn't remember. One evening in April, I was working late at an office building in Midtown, emptying trash bins and vacuuming conference rooms, when I found myself looking at the family photos on someone's desk. A woman about my age with grown children, everyone smiling at what looked like a wedding or graduation party. They looked happy. They looked like they enjoyed each other's company. I tried to remember the last time Daniel had smiled at me like that. Really smiled, not the polite, distant expression he wore when he needed something from me. I tried to remember the last time we'd had a conversation that lasted more than 5 minutes, that went deeper than logistics and requests for money. I couldn't remember that either. The office building was quiet except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sounds of traffic far below. I stood in that empty conference room, holding a photo of someone else's happy family, and I started to cry. Not the quiet tears I'd been shedding at home, but deep, body-shaking sobs that came from somewhere I'd been trying to ignore for years. I was 57 years old, and I felt like I'd wasted my entire life trying to earn love that was never going to come. I'd given everything I had, everything I was, to people who saw me as nothing more than a convenience. My ex-husband had left because I wasn't enough. My daughter loved me but didn't need me. My son needed me but didn't love me, at least not in any way that I could feel. What was the point of all the sacrifice if it only made me feel more alone? I finished my shift and took the long train ride back to Brooklyn, watching the city lights blur past the window and thinking about the choices I'd made. Had I spoiled Daniel by always saying yes? Had I taught him that my love was cheap by giving it so freely? Had I made myself invisible by never demanding to be seen? When I got home, Daniel was gone, out somewhere with friends in the car I'd bought him. The apartment was dark and quiet, filled with the familiar smells of loneliness and regret. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at my small kitchen table, looking at the pile of bills I couldn't afford to pay, thinking about the sacrifices I'd made that nobody seemed to notice. That's when I saw Daniel's phone lying on the counter. He'd forgotten it, rushing out to meet his friends, leaving behind the device that had become an extension of his hand. The screen was cracked, another expense he'd asked me to cover but I'd refused, one of the few times I'd said no in recent memory. I wasn't planning to look at it. I'm not the kind of mother who snoops through her children's personal things. But the screen lit up with a text message notification, and I could see the preview without unlocking the phone. Jake, dude, your mom's car is such a piece of shit lol. My dad would have gotten me something way better. My heart stopped. I stared at the words, reading them over and over, trying to make them mean something different. But there it was, plain and cruel, my son's friend mocking the sacrifice I'd made, and Daniel not defending me, not defending the car, not defending anything. Before I could stop myself, I was scrolling through more messages. I know it was wrong, but I felt like I was drowning and desperately needed to understand how deep the water was. Daniel, yeah, it's embarrassing. But it's better than taking the subway, I guess. Miguel, why didn't she just give you the money instead? You could have found something decent. Daniel, because she thinks she knows what's best for me. She never asks what I actually want. Jake, at least you got something. My mom would have made me buy my own car. Daniel, lucky you. Your mom has a job that pays real money. My mom cleans toilets for a living. As if the work I did to support our family was something shameful. As if the hands that had changed his diapers and packed his lunches and held him when he was sick were somehow dirty because they earned money cleaning up after other people. I set the phone down with trembling hands and walked to my bedroom, closing the door softly behind me. I sat on the edge of my bed, the same bed I'd been sleeping in alone for 7 years, and I felt something shift inside me. Not just hurt. Not just disappointment. Something harder, more permanent. I'd been invisible to my family for so long that I'd started to disappear from myself too. When was the last time I'd done something just because I wanted to? When was the last time I'd bought something for myself, gone somewhere for my own enjoyment, said no to a request because I needed to take care of my own needs first? I couldn't remember that either. The next morning, Daniel found his phone and apologized casually for leaving it behind. Hope it didn't ring too much, he said, pocketing the device and heading toward the door. I'm taking the car to work. Daniel, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. We need to talk. Can it wait? I'm already running late. No, I said, surprising both of us with the firmness in my voice. It can't wait. He stopped, one hand on the doorknob, and turned to look at me with the impatience of a teenager who'd never really grown up. What's wrong now? He said, checking the time on his phone. I saw your messages, I said quietly. About the car. About me. His expression changed instantly, becoming defensive, angry, caught. You went through my phone? It was here. It lit up. I saw what you and your friends were saying about the car I bought you, about the work I do to pay for our life. Mom, those were just what? Just jokes? Just your real feelings that you share with everyone except me? He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture he'd inherited from his father along with the tendency to damage the people who loved him most. Look, I didn't mean anything by it. It's just guy talk, you know? We joke around. You told them I clean toilets for a living. Like that's something to be ashamed of. I didn't mean it like that. How did you mean it, Daniel? He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him calculating what to say, how to get out of this conversation and back to his life where my feelings didn't matter and my sacrifices were just background noise. I'm sorry, he said finally, but it sounded flat, automatic. I shouldn't have said that stuff. But you have to understand, it's hard for me when my friends have so much more than we do. So much more than we do, I repeated. Daniel, I bought you a $12,000 car. $12,000 that I saved by working 3 jobs and going without everything I needed. How is that not enough? Because it's not what I wanted, he exploded, finally showing some real emotion. Because you never ask me what I want, you just decide what you think is best and expect me to be grateful. Because I'm 18 years old and I don't want to drive around in some old, embarrassing car that makes me look poor. We are poor, I said quietly. I am poor. I work as a cleaning lady because that's the job I could get with a high school education and 2 children to support. I live in this tiny apartment because it's what I can afford on my salary. I shop at discount stores and clip coupons and turn down the heat in winter because that's what poor people do. Exactly, he said, as if that proved his point. So why did you waste money on a car I didn't want instead of saving up to get me something better? The logic was so twisted, so cruel in its selfishness, that I felt like I was talking to a stranger. Where was the little boy who used to hug me so tight I could barely breathe? Where was the child who used to thank me for the smallest kindnesses, who used to tell me I was the best mom in the world? When had gift giving become about getting what you want instead of appreciating what someone gives you? I didn't waste money, I said, my voice growing stronger. I invested everything I had in you. In your future. In showing you that you matter to me more than anything else in this world. Well, maybe you should invest in yourself instead, he said, finally revealing what he really thought. Maybe if you got a better job, a better apartment, a better life, I wouldn't be embarrassed to bring my friends around. The words hung in the air between us like smoke from a fire that was just now catching hold. My son was embarrassed by me. By my life. By the sacrifices I'd made to give him opportunities I'd never had. Get out, I whispered. What? I said get out. Take the car I bought you and get out of my apartment. Mom, come on. Don't be dramatic. I'm not being dramatic. I'm being clear. You're embarrassed by me? You think my life isn't good enough? You think my sacrifices are wasted on you? Then leave. Go somewhere better. Go somewhere you won't have to be ashamed. For the first time since this conversation started, Daniel looked uncertain. Like maybe he'd pushed too far, said too much. I didn't mean, yes, you did. You meant every word. And now I know exactly where I stand with you. He grabbed his jacket and keys, muttering something about me being impossible to talk to, and slammed the door behind him. The sound echoed through my small apartment, and then there was silence. Complete, perfect silence. I sat down at my kitchen table and realized that for the first time in 18 years, I wasn't worried about Daniel. I wasn't planning my day around his needs, his schedule, his wants. I wasn't calculating how much money I had left after giving him what he asked for. I was thinking about myself. And it felt terrifying and liberating at the same time. Do you know what silence sounds like when you've been drowning in other people's demands your whole life? It sounds like possibility. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called in sick to my evening cleaning job and took a walk around my neighborhood. Not rushing to catch the subway, not carrying bags of groceries I couldn't afford, not hurrying to meet someone else's deadline. Just walking, looking at the world around me as if I were seeing it for the first time. Brooklyn in spring is beautiful in ways I'd forgotten. The trees were budding along the sidewalks, and I could smell cooking from the restaurants and food trucks that made our neighborhood feel alive. I passed the library where I used to take Daniel and Sarah when they were small, the playground where they'd learn to swing and climb and be brave. I remembered being proud of this neighborhood then, proud of the community we'd built, the life we'd created together after Robert left. When had I started seeing it through Daniel's eyes, noticing only what was missing instead of appreciating what was there? I stopped at a coffee shop I'd passed hundreds of times but never entered, too aware of the money in my wallet and the bills waiting at home. The coffee was expensive, probably $3 more than I should spend, but I ordered it anyway. A large cafe latte with an extra shot, the kind of drink I used to see other women enjoying while I nursed cheap tea bags at home. I sat by the window and watched people pass by on the sidewalk. Families, couples, teenagers laughing together, elderly men playing chess at small tables outside. Life happening all around me, life I'd been too busy to notice while I worked myself to exhaustion trying to earn love that felt more distant every day. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. Mom, I'm sorry about this morning. Can we talk when I get home? I stared at the message for a long time, feeling the familiar urge to say yes, to forgive, to pretend his words hadn't cut as deep as they had. But something had changed in me that morning, something that made me type back, not today. I need some time to think. He didn't respond, and I was surprised by how relieved that made me feel. Over the next few days, I started noticing things I'd been blind to for years. The way Daniel expected me to cook his meals but never offered to help with dishes. The way he left his laundry on his bedroom floor, assuming I'd pick it up and wash it. The way he took hot showers without ever thinking about the utility bills, used my car insurance and gasoline money without contributing anything himself. I started noticing how often our conversations began with him asking for something and ended with him disappearing as soon as he got it or didn't get it. When was the last time he'd asked about my day? When was the last time he'd noticed that I was tired, or stressed, or sad? When was the last time he'd treated me like a person instead of a service? I called Sarah one evening, something I rarely did because I was always afraid of bothering her, intruding on her busy life with her husband and career. "Mom," she said, sounding surprised but pleased. "How are you? Is everything okay?" "I'm fine," I said, then corrected myself. "Actually, I'm not fine. I think I need to talk to someone about Daniel." We talked for over an hour, longer than we'd talked in months. Sarah listened as I told her about the car, the text messages, the conversation that had opened my eyes to how invisible I'd become in my own life. She was quiet for a long time after I finished. "Mom," she said finally, "I've been worried about this for years, but I didn't know how to bring it up without sounding like I was criticizing you." "What do you mean?" "You've been letting Daniel walk all over you since he was a teenager. Dad did the same thing, and now Daniel thinks that's how relationships work. You give everything, and the other person takes everything, and nobody talks about whether that's fair or sustainable." I just wanted to show him how much I loved him. "I know. But love isn't supposed to be one-sided. Love isn't supposed to make you feel invisible." After we hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment thinking about what Sarah had said. She was right, of course. I had let Robert take until I felt empty, and then I'd done the same thing with Daniel. Somewhere along the way, I'd confused love with self-sacrifice, generosity with self-erasure. But how do you change patterns that have been building for decades? How do you ask someone to see you when they've learned that they don't have to? The answer came from Mrs. Alvarez, my neighbor who'd become the closest thing to family I had besides my children. She knocked on my door the next evening with a container of her famous empanadas and an invitation to talk. "Mija," she said, settling into my small kitchen with the ease of someone who'd been welcome there for years, "you look like you haven't been sleeping." I told her everything. About the car, about Daniel's ingratitude, about the pattern I was finally beginning to see clearly. Mrs. Alvarez listened without judgment, nodding at all the right places, making small sounds of sympathy and understanding. "You know," she said when I finished, "I raised 4 children, and I made some of the same mistakes you did. I thought if I gave them everything they wanted, they would never doubt how much I loved them. What happened? 2 of them learned to take me for granted, just like your Daniel. They would call when they needed money, visit when they wanted something, but never just to spend time with their mother. It took me years to realize that I had taught them to treat me that way. How did you change it?" "I started saying no," she said simply. "Not to be mean, not to punish them, but to teach them that love is a two-way street. That respect has to be earned, even from your children. Especially from your children." Mrs. Alvarez helped me understand that setting boundaries wasn't cruel, it was necessary. That demanding respect wasn't selfish, it was healthy. That my worth as a person, as a mother, didn't depend on how much I was willing to sacrifice for someone who never asked if I could afford the sacrifice. Over the next 2 weeks, I started making small changes. When Daniel asked for gas money, I said, "I don't have extra money right now." When he expected dinner to be ready when he came home from work, I said, "There are ingredients in the refrigerator. You're welcome to cook something." When he left his laundry on the floor, I left it there. The changes were small, but Daniel noticed immediately. He started getting frustrated, asking what was wrong with me, why I was being so difficult. Each complaint only confirmed what I was beginning to understand. He had learned to see my generosity as an obligation rather than a gift. "Mom, what's your problem lately?" he said one evening when he came home to find no dinner waiting and his dirty clothes still on his bedroom floor. "You're acting weird." "I'm not acting weird," I said calmly. "I'm acting like a person who has her own needs and responsibilities." "Since when do you have needs?" "You're a mom. That's your job." The words were so casually cruel, so thoughtlessly dismissive, that I actually laughed. Not because anything was funny, but because the absurdity of it struck me all at once. "My job?" I said. "Daniel, I work 3 actual jobs to pay for this apartment, for food, for the car I bought you. Being your mother is not my job, it's my relationship with you. And relationships require respect and consideration from both people." "Whatever," he said, grabbing his keys. "I'm going out." "Take care," I called after him, but I didn't tell him to be careful or ask when he'd be home. Small changes, but they felt revolutionary. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I ran a hot bath, lit a candle I'd been saving for a special occasion that never came, and soaked in the warm water until my fingers were wrinkled. I read a book I'd checked out from the library, drank a glass of wine I'd bought for myself instead of saving for company, and went to bed early. I slept better that night than I had in months. The real turning point came 3 weeks later, when Daniel asked me for $500 to help pay for a spring break trip with his friends. $500 I didn't have, for a luxury I'd never been able to afford at his age or any age since. "I can't give you that much money," I told him. "Why not? You have that money from working all those jobs." "Daniel, that money pays for rent, groceries, utilities, and all the other expenses that keep us housed and fed. I don't have $500 extra lying around. But this is important to me," he said, as if that settled the matter. "All my friends are going. I'll look like a loser if I can't go. Then maybe you should get an additional part-time job and save the money yourself." He stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. "Are you serious right now? You want me to work more just so I can go on vacation?" "That's how most people afford vacations, Daniel. They work, they save, they spend money they've earned. But you're my mom. You're supposed to help me with things like this. I'm supposed to help you learn to be independent and responsible. Giving you money you haven't earned for trips you can't afford doesn't help you, it cripples you." The argument that followed was unlike any we'd ever had. Daniel accused me of being selfish, of not caring about his happiness, of changing into someone he didn't recognize. I listened to his anger and felt something surprising: relief. Finally, we were having an honest conversation. Finally, he was showing me his real feelings instead of the polite manipulation he'd been using for years. Finally, I was standing up for myself instead of crumbling under the weight of his disappointment. "You're right," I told him when his fury exhausted itself. "I am changing into someone you don't recognize. I'm changing into someone who values herself, who doesn't apologize for having needs, who doesn't buy love with money she doesn't have." "This is ridiculous," he said. "You're being ridiculous." "Maybe. But I'm also being honest. And if you can't handle honesty, if you can't handle a relationship where you're expected to give as much as you take, then maybe we need to reconsider this arrangement." "What arrangement?" "You living here rent-free, eating food you didn't buy, driving a car you didn't pay for, while treating me like I don't deserve basic respect." The silence that followed was different from any silence we'd shared. It wasn't comfortable or familiar. It was the silence of two people realizing they'd been living in different realities, having different relationships, needing different things. "I think," I said carefully, "that you should start looking for your own place. It's time for you to be independent." "You're kicking me out?" Daniel's voice cracked slightly, and for a moment I saw the little boy he used to be, uncertain and afraid. "I'm helping you grow up," I said gently. "And I'm helping myself remember who I am besides your mother." That night, Daniel called his father for the first time in over a year. I could hear him in his room, voice raised, complaining about my unreasonable demands and sudden personality change. I wondered what Robert would tell him, whether he'd offer the son a place to stay, whether he'd take responsibility for any of the patterns that had led us to this moment. It didn't matter. For the first time in years, Robert's opinion wasn't my problem to manage. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Sarah drove in from New Jersey, arriving at my door with coffee and pastries and a concerned expression. "Daniel called me," she said. "He's very upset about your conversation last night." "I imagine he is." "Mom, are you okay? He said you're acting completely different, that you told him to move out." I invited Sarah in and we sat at my small kitchen table while I explained everything that had been building over the past few weeks and years. The car, the ingratitude, the pattern of taking without giving, the realization that I'd become invisible to my own family. Sarah listened quietly, occasionally asking questions, her expression growing more thoughtful as I talked. "I think," she said finally, "that this is probably the best thing that could happen to both of you." "Really?" "Mom, I love Daniel, but he's been spoiled his entire life. Dad spoiled him by never holding him accountable for anything, and then you spoiled him by trying to make up for Dad's absence. You've both taught him that his needs matter more than anyone else's, and that's not doing him any favors as he tries to become an adult. But what if he can't handle being on his own? What if he needs me? Then he'll figure it out, the way the rest of us did. Mom, you were younger than Daniel is now when you had me. You figured out how to pay rent and buy groceries and raise children. He can figure out how to take care of himself." Sarah stayed for the afternoon, and we talked more honestly than we had in years. She told me about her own struggles with independence, how grateful she was for the work ethic I'd taught her, how worried she'd been about Daniel's sense of entitlement. "I wanted to say something," she admitted, "but I didn't want to interfere. And honestly, I thought maybe you liked feeling needed by him." "I did," I said. "I think I was afraid that if he didn't need me, he wouldn't want me around at all. But need isn't the same as love, Mom. And the kind of need you're talking about isn't healthy for either of you." That evening, after Sarah left, Daniel and I had our final conversation about his living situation. He'd found a friend who was looking for a roommate, an apartment in Queens that he could afford if he picked up more hours at work. "I still think you're being unfair," he said, but there was less anger in his voice than there had been before. More resignation, maybe even the beginning of understanding. I'm being different, I agreed. And different probably feels unfair when you're used to getting everything you want. I don't get everything I want. Daniel, you've lived in this apartment for 18 years without paying rent. You've eaten food you didn't buy, used utilities you didn't pay for, driven a car you didn't earn. You've been supported emotionally and financially without being expected to support anyone in return. Most people would call that getting everything you want. He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him thinking, maybe really thinking about our relationship for the first time. I do appreciate what you've done for me, he said finally. I know I don't say it very often, but I do. Appreciation isn't just words, Daniel. It's actions. It's consideration. It's recognizing that other people have feelings and needs that matter as much as yours do. I'm still learning how to do that. I know. And you'll have plenty of opportunities to practice in your own apartment, with roommates who won't love you unconditionally no matter how you treat them. The conversation was sad but not bitter, honest but not cruel. When Daniel moved out the following weekend, we hugged goodbye, and it felt like the end of one relationship and the beginning of another. Maybe a better one, built on choice rather than obligation, respect rather than dependence. For the first time in 18 years, I was alone in my apartment. Really alone, with no one else's schedule to consider, no one else's needs to anticipate. The quiet was profound and slightly frightening, like standing at the edge of an ocean and not knowing how deep the water was. But it was also peaceful. For the first time in decades, the silence belonged to me. I spent the first week of my new independence doing small things I'd been putting off for years. I rearranged my furniture, putting my comfort first instead of arranging everything around other people's preferences. I bought groceries based on what I wanted to eat, not what Daniel liked or what was cheapest. I watched movies he'd always complained about, listened to music he said was old and boring. I discovered that I liked jazz, something I'd never known about myself. I discovered that I preferred my apartment cooler than Daniel had liked it, warmer than Robert had demanded. I discovered that I enjoyed cooking for one, making exactly the amount of food I wanted without worrying about leftovers or complaints. Small discoveries, but they felt revolutionary. The biggest change came when Mrs. Alvarez invited me to join a support group that met at the community center near Prospect Park. It was specifically for women over 50 who were navigating major life transitions, divorce, empty nest syndrome, career changes, financial independence. I almost didn't go. The idea of sitting in a circle with strangers, talking about my personal struggles, felt terrifying. But Mrs. Alvarez insisted, and since she'd been right about everything else, I decided to trust her judgment one more time. The group was small, maybe 8 women ranging in age from early 50s to late 60s. They came from different backgrounds, different neighborhoods, different circumstances, but we all shared something fundamental. We were all learning how to put ourselves first after decades of putting everyone else first. There was Maria, who'd raised 4 children as a single mother and was now learning to date again at 58. There was Janet, who'd spent 30 years married to a man who criticized everything she did and was now discovering her own opinions about art and politics and food. There was Carmen, who'd worked 2 jobs to put her son through college only to have him move across the country without staying in touch. Listening to their stories, I realized that my experience with Daniel wasn't unique or shameful. It was part of a pattern that affected women across all cultures and economic levels. We'd been taught to measure our worth by how much we could give, how much we could sacrifice, how invisible we could make ourselves in service to others. The hardest part, Maria said during one of our meetings, is learning that you're allowed to want things for yourself. That your dreams and needs and preferences matter just as much as everyone else's. I don't even remember what I want anymore, Janet admitted. I spent so many years doing what my husband wanted, what my children needed, that I lost track of my own desires. I understood exactly what she meant. When was the last time someone had asked me what I wanted? When was the last time I'd asked myself? The support group gave me homework: make a list of 10 things I wanted to do, try, or experience. Not things I wanted for my children or my family, but things I wanted for myself. The exercise was harder than I expected. I sat at my kitchen table with a blank piece of paper for over an hour before I could write down a single item. I'd spent so many years defining myself in relationship to other people that I'd forgotten I had an identity separate from motherhood, from caregiving, from sacrifice. Finally, slowly, the list began to emerge. 1. Learn to paint. 2. Take a cooking class. 3. Travel somewhere I'd never been. 4. Read books for pleasure instead of just practicality. 5. Go to concerts or shows. 6. Have dinner at restaurants I'd never been able to afford. 7. Learn to dance. 8. Make friends who didn't know me as someone's mother. 9. Wear clothes that made me feel beautiful instead of invisible. 10. Save money for myself instead of always spending it on others. Looking at the list, I felt a mixture of excitement and grief. Excitement for the possibilities it represented, grief for all the years I'd spent not knowing these possibilities existed for me. But I was only 57. If I was lucky, I had 20 or 25 good years ahead of me. That was enough time for a completely different kind of life, a life where I mattered as much as the people I loved. I decided to start with painting. There was an art supply store in Park Slope that I'd passed hundreds of times but never entered. I spent an afternoon there, talking to the patient staff about brushes and canvases and paints, feeling like a child in a toy store. I bought basic supplies, nothing fancy, nothing I couldn't afford, and set up a small workspace in the corner of my living room where the light was best. My first painting was terrible. A lopsided bowl of fruit that looked more like abstract shapes than recognizable objects. But for 3 hours, I was completely absorbed in mixing colors and trying to capture the curve of an apple, the shadow cast by a banana. For 3 hours, I wasn't thinking about Daniel or Robert or money or loneliness. I was just present, just trying, just being myself in a way I hadn't experienced in years. The painting was awful, but the feeling was extraordinary. I started taking evening classes at Brooklyn College, not toward a degree, just for the joy of learning. Art history, literature, introductory Spanish. I met people my own age who were also exploring new interests, also figuring out who they were outside their primary relationships. One of my classmates, a woman named Patricia who'd recently retired from teaching, invited me to join her book club. Then the book club invited me to a monthly dinner at different ethnic restaurants around the city. Then the restaurant group started going to movies and museums and concerts together. Slowly, I was building a social life that had nothing to do with being someone's mother or someone's ex-wife. I was making friends who chose to spend time with me because they enjoyed my company, not because they needed something from me. The transformation wasn't immediate or dramatic. There were still difficult days when I felt lonely or questioned whether I'd been too hard on Daniel. There were still moments when I was tempted to call him and offer money or help, to slip back into the familiar patterns of caregiving and sacrifice. But each time I stood firm, each time I chose to respect my own boundaries, I felt a little stronger. Each time I did something for myself, bought a book, visited a museum, had lunch with a friend, I remembered what it felt like to matter, to have preferences, to take up space in the world. For months after Daniel moved out, he called me. Not to ask for money or help, but just to talk. He told me about his job, his roommate, the challenges of budgeting and groceries and maintaining a car he was now paying for himself. It's harder than I thought it would be, he admitted. Managing everything on my own. Most things worth doing are harder than we think they'll be, I said. But they're also more rewarding. I've been thinking about what you said, about respect and consideration. About how I treated you when I was living there. And I think maybe you were right. I think I took a lot of things for granted. It wasn't a dramatic apology or a complete acknowledgement of everything that had happened between us. But it was a beginning, the first sign that our relationship might evolve into something more balanced and healthy. I'd like to take you to dinner sometime, he said. Like, a real dinner at a nice restaurant. My treat. I'd like that too. We made plans for the following weekend, and I found myself looking forward to seeing him in a way I hadn't in years. Not because I was desperate for his presence or approval, but because I was curious about the young man he was becoming, the person he might be when he wasn't taking me for granted. The dinner was different from any meal we'd shared in years. Daniel asked about my painting classes, my book club, my new friendships. He listened when I talked about my interests and opinions. He thanked me for the sacrifices I'd made over the years, and he apologized for not seeing or acknowledging them earlier. I always just assumed you'd be there, he said. I never thought about what you wanted or needed because you never seemed to want or need anything. I wanted and needed a lot of things, I told him. I just got very good at hiding it, even from myself. Are you happier now? He asked. Living alone, doing your own thing? I thought about the question seriously. Was I happier? My life was certainly different. Quieter in some ways, busier in others. I had less money because I wasn't sharing expenses, but I also had more freedom because I wasn't supporting anyone else. I had fewer family obligations but more personal interests. I'm more myself now, I said finally. Whether that makes me happier depends on how you define happiness. But I feel more alive, more present, more aware of who I am and what I want. That feels important. I'm proud of you, Daniel said, and I realized it was the first time he'd ever said those words to me. I know it must have been scary to change so much. Everything worthwhile is scary at first. We hugged goodbye in the parking lot, and it felt like the hug I'd been hoping for when I gave him the car keys 9 months earlier. Not grateful or obligated, but genuine. Affectionate. Respectful. After dinner, I drove home through Brooklyn, past all the familiar landmarks that had defined my small world for so many years. The apartment buildings where I'd cleaned offices, the grocery stores where I'd stretched every dollar, the subway stations where I'd waited for trains that would take me to work I did for other people's benefit. But now I was driving through those same streets as someone who mattered, someone with interests and friendships and plans that had nothing to do with sacrifice or invisibility. The neighborhood looked the same, but I was seeing it through different eyes. Do you recognize that feeling when you realize you've been living someone else's life, and suddenly you're ready to live your own? When I got home, I made myself tea and sat in my small living room, looking at the paintings I'd been working on, the books stacked on my coffee table, the photos of my book club friends pinned to my refrigerator. This was my life now. Not perfect, not wealthy, not without challenges, but mine. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, working 3 jobs to buy a car for a son who saw it as an embarrassment rather than a gift. That woman had been so hungry for love and approval that she'd forgotten she deserved both without having to buy them. She'd been so focused on being needed that she'd forgotten she had the right to need things too. That woman had been invisible, even to herself. But invisibility, I'd learned, was a choice. You could choose to disappear, to make yourself small, to live entirely in service to other people's happiness. Or you could choose to matter, to take up space, to have opinions and preferences and boundaries. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Mrs. Alvarez's number. "Hola, Mija," she answered. "How was dinner with Daniel?" "It was good," I said. "Really good. Different than it would have been a year ago. And how are you feeling about everything? About the changes you've made?" I looked around my small apartment, at the evidence of the life I was building for myself, and smiled. "I feel like I exist," I said. "For the first time in years, I feel like I actually exist." "That's the most important feeling in the world," Mrs. Alvarez said. "Everything else you can figure out from there." After we hung up, I opened my journal and wrote about the dinner, about Daniel's apology, about the strange and wonderful sensation of being seen by my own child. But mostly I wrote about the realization that had been growing in me for months, that love, real love, couldn't exist between invisible people and selfish ones. Real love required 2 people who could see each other clearly, who could give and receive with equal grace. I was finally learning to be someone who could be loved that way. A year later, I moved to a larger apartment in the same neighborhood, a place with enough space for a proper art studio and a dining room large enough to host the dinner parties I'd started throwing for my book club friends. Daniel helped me move, along with 2 friends from my painting class and Mrs. Alvarez's grandson. It wasn't a dramatic change, still Brooklyn, still the same community, still within my modest means. But it was a concrete symbol of how my life had expanded, how my world had grown beyond the narrow boundaries of sacrifice and obligation. Sarah came for the housewarming party, bringing flowers and wine, and her husband, who'd driven in from New Jersey specifically to see my paintings. I watched my daughter moving through my new space, looking proud and maybe a little amazed at the transformation she was witnessing. "Mom," she said as we cleaned up after the party, "you seem like a completely different person than you were 2 years ago." "Do I? You seem bigger somehow. Like you take up more space in the world." "I take up exactly the amount of space I always did," I said. "I just stopped pretending I didn't deserve to use it." The hardest part of my transformation hadn't been learning to say no to Daniel or setting boundaries with my family. The hardest part had been learning to say yes to myself, to believe that my interests and preferences and needs were as valid as anyone else's. I'd spent so many years believing that being a good mother meant making myself invisible, that love meant always putting others first, that generosity required self-sacrifice. It had taken me 57 years to understand that the opposite was true, that the most loving thing I could do was model what it looked like to value yourself, to have boundaries, to live a life that reflected your own dreams and choices. Some nights, when I'm painting in my studio or reading in my comfortable chair, I think about that moment with the car keys, the moment when Daniel's ingratitude shattered my illusions and forced me to confront the patterns that had been destroying both of us. I'm grateful for that moment now, grateful for the pain that forced me to change. Without it, I might have spent the rest of my life invisible, giving everything I had to people who'd learned to take me for granted, wondering why love felt like such a one-way street. Instead, I learned that love, real love, requires visibility. It requires 2 people who matter to each other, who see each other clearly, who give and receive with awareness and appreciation. I learned that being someone's mother doesn't mean disappearing into that role completely. That sacrifice without respect isn't love, it's enabling. That teaching someone to take you for granted isn't kindness, it's cruelty to both of you. Most importantly, I learned that it's never too late to start mattering to yourself. It's never too late to become visible, to develop interests and friendships and dreams that have nothing to do with anyone else's needs or approval. Daniel visits regularly now, usually bringing flowers or coffee or small gifts that show he's been thinking of me. We have dinner together twice a month, and our conversations are rich with mutual interest and respect. He tells me about his work, his relationships, his goals, and he listens when I tell him about my painting, my book club, my travels with Patricia and the restaurant group. He's never again asked me for money I couldn't afford to give, never again expected me to solve problems he could solve himself. Not because I've become harsh or unloving, but because he's learned to see me as a complete person with my own life and limitations and needs. He's become a better man, and I've become a more complete woman. Our relationship is smaller in scope than it used to be, but infinitely richer in quality. We love each other not because we're obligated to, but because we choose to. Not because we need each other in desperate, unhealthy ways, but because we enjoy each other's company and care about each other's happiness. Last month, Daniel called me with news that he'd been promoted to assistant manager at his job. He was excited, proud, eager to share his success with someone who would understand how hard he'd worked for it. "Mom," he said, "I want to take you somewhere special to celebrate. Anywhere you want to go." My treat. I suggested a museum exhibition I'd been wanting to see, followed by dinner at a restaurant I'd been curious about but had never felt I could afford, even for a special occasion. We spent the afternoon looking at paintings together, talking about color and composition and the way art can capture feelings you don't have words for. Daniel asked thoughtful questions and listened to my amateur but enthusiastic explanations. At dinner, he asked for my advice about a decision he was facing at work, treating my opinion as valuable, worth considering. Walking back to the subway that evening, he took my arm naturally, protectively, the way a son should walk with his mother when she's getting older and the streets are crowded. "Thank you," he said as we waited for the train. "For what?" "For not giving up on me. For caring enough to make me grow up, even when it was hard for both of us." "Thank you for letting me," I said. "For becoming someone I could be proud of." The train arrived, and we rode back to Brooklyn together, talking about a movie he wanted to see, a book I was reading, plans for Sarah's upcoming visit. Normal conversation between two people who cared about each other, who saw each other clearly, who had learned to love without keeping score. When I got home that night, I sat in my studio and painted until almost midnight. A landscape this time, inspired by a trip I'd taken the previous weekend to the Hudson Valley with my painting class. Rolling hills and autumn trees and a sky that seemed to go on forever. As I worked, I thought about the question Daniel had asked me over dinner, whether I ever regretted the difficult period we'd gone through, whether I wished I'd handled things differently. I'd told him then that I had no regrets, and I meant it. The pain of that period in our relationship had been necessary, like the pain of childbirth or healing from an injury. It was the price of growth, of change, of refusing to accept dysfunction as normal. But more than that, those difficult months had taught me something I'd needed to learn for decades, that I deserved to be loved well, to be seen clearly, to matter in my own life. That being someone's mother or daughter or partner didn't require me to disappear, to become invisible, to live entirely in service to someone else's happiness. I'd learned that love multiplies when it's shared between people who value themselves and each other. That respect isn't something you can earn through sacrifice, it's something you teach others to give by demonstrating that you deserve it. As I painted the last touches on that landscape, adding highlights to capture the way late sunlight caught the edges of leaves, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Not just with the painting, though I was pleased with how it had turned out, but with the life I'd built, the person I'd become, the relationships I'd learned to nurture without losing myself in them. I thought about all the women in my support group, all the people struggling to find the balance between loving others and loving themselves, all the mothers and daughters and partners who'd learned to measure their worth by how much they could give up, how invisible they could become. I wanted to tell them what I'd learned, that you can love deeply without disappearing. That you can be generous without being invisible. That you can care for others while still mattering to yourself. That it's never too late to become visible, to start taking up space, to begin living a life that reflects your own dreams and needs and preferences. That love, real love, healthy love, requires two people who can see each other clearly, who value themselves and each other, who give and receive with equal grace. That being needed isn't enough if you're not also respected. That being useful isn't enough if you're not also valued for who you are, not just what you can provide. Have you ever felt invisible in your own life? Have you ever loved someone so much that you forgot to love yourself? Have you ever given so much that you lost track of what you needed to receive? If any of this feels familiar, if you recognize yourself in my story or know someone who's lived something similar, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story matters too, and sharing it might help someone else understand that they're not alone, that change is possible, that it's never too late to start mattering to yourself. If this video helped you think about your own relationships differently, or if you think it might help someone you care about, please like it and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps me keep sharing these stories, keep opening my heart, keep reminding all of us that we deserve to be seen, valued, and loved well. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. Thank you for reminding me that none of us has to be invisible unless we choose to be. And remember, you matter. Your dreams matter. Your needs matter. Your happiness matters. Not because of what you can give or sacrifice or provide for others, but because you exist, because you're here, because your life has value that doesn't depend on anyone else's approval or appreciation. It's never too late to start believing that. It's never too late to start living like it's true. Because it is true. You matter. You've always mattered. Sometimes it just takes courage to start acting like you know it.